The camera pans across the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in morning fog. San Francisco's skyline emerges like a dream from the mist. On May 19, 2024, a Sunday that would forever change California, thousands gathered in San Francisco for something unprecedented in American history. What began as the National Eucharistic Pilgrimage would become something far more extraordinary, a day when heaven seemed to touch earth. But before we continue, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about faith, miracles, and the power of collective belief. This is a story that shook an entire state, and it's only just beginning. Inside the Cathedral of St. Mary of the Assumption, more than 2,500 people packed every pew. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of incense. Among the crowd were young families, elderly couples clutching rosaries, seminarians in black cassocks, and nuns in habits that hadn't been seen in San Francisco streets for decades. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone stood at the altar, holding what Catholics believe to be the body of Christ, the Eucharist. He had no idea that within hours, this sacred procession would trigger events that would be talked about from Los Angeles to Sacramento, from Silicon Valley to the Central Valley. The Mass was unlike any other. Frank LaRocca's newly composed Mass for Eucharistic Renaissance filled the cathedral with haunting melodies. Children sat mesmerized. Adults wept openly. Something was stirring in that sacred space, something that couldn't be explained by music or liturgy alone. Among the congregation sat Maria Gonzalez, a 67-year-old grandmother from Oakland. She had driven 2 hours just to be there. "I felt called," she would later tell reporters. "Something was pulling me to San Francisco that day. I've been Catholic my whole life, but that morning, I felt like I was being prepared for something. I didn't know what," Maria would recall months later, her voice still filled with wonder. 8 young adults, dubbed the Perpetual Pilgrims, knelt in the front rows. They were about to embark on a 2,200-mile journey to Indianapolis, walking with the Eucharist across America. 2 seminarians, 2 Franciscan priests, and 6 young lay people, all under 30, all about to witness something that would change their lives forever. The Archbishop's homily resonated through the cathedral in both English and Spanish. He spoke of the way of love and called this Pentecost Sunday a torrent of God's grace. His words seemed prophetic now. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a professor of Marian studies at the University of San Francisco, sat quietly in the 7th row, notebook in hand. She had studied apparitions worldwide and was attending as a scholar, not expecting to become a witness herself. The cathedral's massive organ thundered as the congregation sang, "Holy God, we praise thy name." The sound reverberated off the walls, seeming to shake the very foundations of the building. Several witnesses later described feeling as if the music was preparing them for something momentous. At exactly 1 p.m., the massive cathedral doors opened. What emerged was not just a procession. It was a river of faith flowing through the streets of one of America's most secular cities. Archbishop Cordileone stepped into the San Francisco sunlight, carrying a golden monstrance containing the Eucharist. Behind him, an extraordinary sight unfolded. Thousands of Catholics spilling onto the streets in what locals would later describe as the largest religious gathering in the city's modern history. The original plan called for a lengthy walk through San Francisco's neighborhoods. But just hours before, Golden Gate Bridge authorities had demanded schedule changes due to wind conditions and security concerns. What seemed like a setback would prove to be divine providence. The procession moved past multimillion-dollar homes and homeless encampments, a stark reminder of San Francisco's contrasts. Smartphones emerged from every window. A woman in a Tesla pulled over, filming and muttering under her breath. Children pressed their faces against apartment windows. Some drivers honked in approval, making the sign of the cross as they passed. Father Miguel Santos, one of the Franciscan friars, carried a candle that kept flickering in the Bay Area breeze. He would later describe feeling an unusual sense of anticipation. It was like the city itself was holding its breath. "I've led many processions in my 15 years as a priest," Father Santos recalled, "but this felt different. The very air seemed charged with expectation. Even the secular observers seemed affected by something they couldn't name." The demographics of the procession were remarkable. Silicon Valley executives walked alongside migrant farm workers. Tech entrepreneurs pushed strollers next to elderly women with rosaries. Missionaries of charity stood alongside longshoremen from the docks. Carmelites from Los Angeles mingled with professors from UC Berkeley. Dr. Robert Martinez, a cardiologist from UCSF, had joined reluctantly at his wife's insistence. "I'm a man of science," he explained to his colleagues later. "I believe in what I can measure and verify." But that day, I witnessed something that challenged every assumption I had about reality. As the procession moved through the Castro district, something unexpected happened. Residents who had initially watched with skepticism began joining the crowd. Some later described feeling an inexplicable pull to participate, despite having no connection to the Catholic Church. James Chen, who owned a bookstore in the Castro, suddenly closed his shop and joined the procession. "I'm not even Christian," he told reporters weeks later. "But something about seeing all these people walking together in peace. I couldn't stay on the sideline." By the time buses transported the overflow crowd to the Golden Gate Bridge, nearly 4,000 people had gathered. They came from across California, from the Central Valley, from Los Angeles, from San Diego. The ages ranged from newborns in strollers to elderly men and women in wheelchairs, some over 90 years old. Sarah Chen, a photography student from UC Berkeley, was documenting the event for her journalism class. As the buses approached the Golden Gate Bridge, she made the first unusual observation that would be corroborated by dozens of others. "The fog was behaving strangely," she noted in her journal that evening. "I've lived in the Bay Area my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it. Instead of rolling in from the ocean like usual, it seemed to be waiting, like it was positioned specifically for this moment." Weather station KTVU reported winds of 15 to 20 miles per hour that afternoon, typical for May in the Bay Area. But participants described an unusual calm as they approached the bridge. The constant coastal breeze that usually buffets the Golden Gate seemed to have stilled. The Golden Gate Bridge stretched before them, 1.7 miles of iconic orange steel suspended over the churning waters of San Francisco Bay. What was about to happen on that bridge would be discussed in churches, coffee shops, and social media feeds across the nation for months to come. As they disembarked from the buses, many participants described feeling a sense of anticipation that went beyond the excitement of a religious procession. Something was building, something they couldn't identify but could distinctly sense. Margaret O'Brien, a retired teacher from Marian County, gripped her daughter's arm as they prepared to cross. "I felt like I was about to witness history," she said. "Not just religious history, but human history." At exactly 2:30 p.m., Archbishop Cordileone stepped onto the pedestrian walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge. The monstrance gleamed in the afternoon sun as he led what would become the largest Eucharistic procession ever recorded on the West Coast. The planned ceremonial canopy couldn't make the crossing. Bridge authorities deemed it too dangerous in the notorious Golden Gate winds. Looking back, many participants would see this as providential. Nothing would obstruct what was about to unfold above. The procession stretched the entire length of the bridge, more than 1.7 miles of continuous prayer, song, and collective devotion. Wheelchairs rolled alongside baby strollers. Elderly women with canes walked beside marathon runners. Young seminarians carried flickering candles that somehow never blew out, despite what should have been fierce coastal winds. Roberto Morales, a construction worker from San Jose, brought his entire family. "My kids didn't want to come. They thought it would be boring. But when we got to the middle of the bridge, my 14-year-old daughter grabbed my hand and whispered, 'Dad, do you feel that?' I felt it too," Roberto continued. "Like we weren't alone out there. Like something invisible but very real was walking with us." My daughter started crying, not from sadness, but from something she couldn't explain. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychiatrist from San Francisco General Hospital, was documenting the event for a research paper on collective religious experiences. Her scientific skepticism was about to be profoundly challenged. From a psychological perspective, Dr. Walsh explained, I expected to observe typical crowd phenomena, shared excitement, group psychology, perhaps some emotional contagion. What I witnessed defied my professional understanding and 20 years of clinical experience. As the procession reached the bridge's midpoint, the highest point of the span, something extraordinary began to happen. The fog, which had blanketed the bay all morning, started to behave in ways that meteorologists later struggled to explain. James Morrison, a weather forecaster for KPIX-TV, was providing live coverage from a helicopter above. His real-time commentary, later broadcast repeatedly, captured his professional bewilderment. In 20 years of forecasting Bay Area weather, I've never seen fog formations like this. It was almost as if it was being directed by an intelligence. The fog began to thin and swirl upward, creating shafts of golden sunlight that illuminated the procession below like spotlights from heaven. But it was what happened next that would have witnesses talking for years to come. Margaret O'Brien, the 78-year-old retired teacher from Marian County, was walking near the front of the procession when she noticed it first. The light was beautiful, yes, but then I know how this sounds, but I saw a figure in the mist. A woman in white, with her arms outstretched over the whole procession. Margaret wasn't alone. Within minutes, dozens of people were pointing upward, their voices rising in awe and wonder. The pointing became contagious as more and more participants looked up and saw what would later be described as an unmistakable silhouette in the clouds. Tony Ricci, a skeptical tech executive who had come to observe what he privately called medieval superstition, found himself pulling out his phone to record something he couldn't explain or dismiss. I'm not a religious person, Tony admitted months later. I believe in data, in facts, in things that can be measured and replicated. But I recorded something that day that I still can't rationalize. When I show the video to friends, they see it too. It's not pareidolia. It's not seeing patterns in random shapes. There's something actually there. The apparition, for that's what witnesses immediately began calling it, appeared to bless the procession from above. Some described seeing a woman in luminous white robes, her arms extended in a gesture of protection and love. Others spoke of an overwhelming sense of peace that descended upon the crowd like a warm blanket on a cold day. Father Antonio Reyes, a priest from St. Peter's Parish in San Francisco's Mission District, was walking near the Archbishop when something even more extraordinary occurred. I heard singing, he reported. Beautiful singing, like a choir of thousands. But when I looked around, everyone was walking in stunned silence. The mysterious singing was noticed by dozens of others. Unlike the hymns they had been singing earlier, this music seemed to come from above, or perhaps from everywhere at once. Several professional musicians in the procession later described the harmony as impossible, more complex and beautiful than any human choir could produce. Lisa Park, a Korean-American nurse from San Francisco General, brought her 2 young children to teach them about their Catholic heritage. Her 6-year-old son, who had been complaining about the long walk, suddenly stopped and looked up at the fog formation. "Mommy," he said in a voice filled with wonder, "the pretty lady is smiling at us." Lisa looked up and saw what her son was seeing, a face in the clouds, serene and loving, gazing down at the thousands of pilgrims crossing the bridge. He had no idea what he was supposed to see, Lisa explained later. But he saw her too. My 4-year-old pointed and said, "Angel." Children see what adults often miss. As news of the apparition spread through the procession via whispers and pointing, something remarkable happened. Instead of chaos or panic, a profound silence fell over the crowd. The only sounds were the wind, the distant waves below, and that mysterious singing that seemed to come from the sky itself. At 3:15 p.m., as the procession moved through the most challenging section of the bridge crossing, something unprecedented occurred. The fog, instead of dispersing naturally with the afternoon wind patterns, began to form what hundreds of witnesses described as an unmistakable silhouette of a woman with outstretched arms. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the Marian scholar from the University of San Francisco, was walking with the Carmelite nuns when the phenomenon intensified. "I've studied apparitions worldwide: Lourdes, Fatima, Guadalupe, Knock, Akita," she explained. "What I witnessed that day bore the unmistakable characteristics of an authentic mystical experience." The consistency of witness testimonies, the profound spiritual fruits that followed, and the inexplicable meteorological phenomena all align with church-approved apparitions. The figure in the clouds seemed to grow more defined as the procession continued. Witnesses described seeing flowing robes that moved with the wind, hands extended in blessing, and what many interpreted as a maternal expression of infinite love and protection. Michael Stevens, a former Marine and convert to Catholicism, was providing security for the event when he experienced something that shook his military-trained pragmatism to its core. "I've seen combat in Iraq and Afghanistan," Michael explained, his voice still emotional months later. "I've experienced things that would break most people: death, destruction, the worst of humanity. But what I felt on that bridge, it was like being wrapped in complete safety and love. I started crying and couldn't stop. 20 years of carried trauma just lifted away." The apparition appeared to be blessing not just the procession, but the entire San Francisco Bay Area. Witnesses reported that the figure's arms seemed to stretch over the city, the water, the hills of Marian County, and the thousands of motorists passing below on the bridge's lower deck. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a prominent oncologist from UCSF Medical Center, had reluctantly joined the procession at her mother's insistence. As a scientist and physician, she prided herself on empirical thinking and evidence-based conclusions. "I went to humor my mother, who had been battling cancer for 2 years, Dr. Rodriguez explained. "I'm a scientist, a physician. I believe in what I can measure, test, and treat. But that day, I experienced something that medicine can't explain or quantify." Dr. Rodriguez described experiencing what she could only call a complete spiritual healing, not physical, but emotional and psychological, from years of carrying the weight of losing patients to diseases she couldn't cure. "I felt this overwhelming presence of compassion," she continued. "Not just human compassion, but something infinitely greater. For the first time in my medical career, I understood that healing involves more than treating disease. It requires touching the soul." As the procession moved toward the Marian side of the bridge, the phenomenon reached its crescendo. The fog formation seemed to pulse with an inner light, and witnesses reported the mysterious singing growing stronger and more beautiful. Carmen Santos, a grandmother from East San Jose who had suffered from severe arthritis for 15 years, experienced something that changed her understanding of prayer and healing. "I had been in constant pain for years," Carmen explained. "Some days I couldn't get out of bed. But when I saw that beautiful lady in the fog, when I felt that incredible peace, the pain just disappeared. I knelt right there on the bridge and couldn't get up for 10 minutes because I was overwhelmed with gratitude." The miraculous healings weren't limited to physical ailments. David Park, a recovering alcoholic who had been struggling to maintain his 6-month sobriety, was fighting intense cravings when he joined the procession. "I was planning to stop at a bar on the way home," David admitted. "I'd been white-knuckling it for weeks, attending meetings, trying everything. But when I saw that figure in the fog, when I felt that overwhelming love and acceptance, the craving was gone. Completely gone. It's been 18 months now, and the desire to drink has never returned." Father Miguel Santos, the Franciscan friar we met earlier, noticed something else extraordinary. Despite the bridge's notorious winds, which regularly gust at 20 to 30 miles per hour, the candles carried by seminarians and young adults remained lit throughout the entire crossing. "It was meteorologically impossible," Father Santos observed. "I've crossed that bridge hundreds of times. The wind should have extinguished every flame within minutes. But not a single candle went out. It was as if the air itself was protecting those small lights. Cell phone videos from that afternoon would later show the fog formation, the unusual light patterns, and the profound emotional responses of the participants. But what the cameras couldn't capture was the overwhelming sense of divine presence that witnesses unanimously described. Professional photographers and videographers present that day noted something unusual about their equipment. Several reported that their cameras and phones captured images that seemed to show more than what was visible to the naked eye. Sandra Mitchell, a photographer for the Catholic San Francisco newspaper, reviewed her images later and found something extraordinary. In several photos, there are orbs of light and luminous formations that weren't visible when I was taking the pictures. It's as if the camera was seeing into another dimension. The apparition seemed to communicate not through words, but through an overwhelming sense of love, peace, and maternal care. Witnesses consistently described feeling personally acknowledged and blessed by the presence in the clouds. "It was like she was looking directly at me," explained Tom Williams, a tech worker from Silicon Valley who had been struggling with depression. "In that moment, I felt seen and loved in a way I'd never experienced. The depression that had plagued me for years simply lifted away." At the northern vista point of the Golden Gate Bridge, with Marin County spread before them and San Francisco gleaming across the bay, Archbishop Cordileone raised the golden monstrance high above the gathered crowd. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, but no photograph would adequately convey what participants experienced in that sacred instant. The fog formation, which had maintained its ethereal presence throughout the crossing, seemed to intensify at the moment of blessing. Witnesses described the figure in the clouds appearing to extend her hands over the entire San Francisco Bay Area in a gesture of protection and love. "When the Archbishop raised the Eucharist," explained Carmen Santos, the grandmother from East San Jose, "I felt this incredible warmth go through my whole body. All the pain I carry every day from arthritis just left. I knelt down on the asphalt despite my condition and couldn't get up for 10 minutes because I was overwhelmed with tears of joy." But the miracles weren't limited to physical sensations. Stories began emerging immediately of profound spiritual and emotional healings that would have lasting impact on the participants' lives. David Park, the recovering alcoholic we heard from earlier, experienced what he describes as a complete liberation from his addiction. "I was 6 months sober but struggling every single day. The cravings were overwhelming, and I was planning to drink after the event. But when I felt that incredible presence, when I experienced that unconditional love, the desire for alcohol completely disappeared. It's been over a year now, and I've never felt the urge to drink again." Before we continue with these incredible testimonies, I need to ask you to do something. If this story is touching your heart, if it's making you think about the mysteries of faith and the possibility of divine intervention in our modern world, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs hope in their life. Your engagement helps us bring more of these profound stories to light. Now, let's continue with what happened next. As news of the apparition spread through social media and local news outlets, something unprecedented began happening across California. Churches reported massive increases in mass attendance, with some parishes seeing their congregations double or triple overnight. Father Paul O'Malley, pastor of St. Catherine's Parish in San Mateo, witnessed the transformation firsthand. The Sunday after the procession, our church was packed beyond capacity. People were standing in the aisles, sitting on the floor. Many were young adults who hadn't been to Mass in years. They kept asking about the lady on the bridge. Confession lines that hadn't been seen since the 1950s began forming at parishes throughout the state. Priests found themselves staying late into the evening to accommodate the unprecedented demand for the sacrament of reconciliation. Father Roberto Martinez from Sacred Heart Parish in Los Angeles reported, "I've been a priest for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like it. People were waiting 2 hours to go to confession. Many hadn't been to the sacrament in decades. They spoke of feeling called to return to God after hearing about the Golden Gate experience." Local news stations struggled to report the story objectively. KTVU reporter Amanda Chen covered the event live and found herself unexpectedly moved by what she witnessed and heard. "I pride myself on journalistic objectivity and professional skepticism," Amanda explained. "But there was something about interviewing these people, seeing their faces, hearing their stories. I couldn't dismiss what they experienced as mass hysteria or wishful thinking. These were educated, rational people describing consistent experiences." The Archdiocese of San Francisco was cautious in its initial response, as canon law requires thorough investigation of claimed apparitions, a process that can take years or even decades. However, Archbishop Cordileone acknowledged that something extraordinary had occurred. "I can speak only to what I witnessed as the leader of this procession," the Archbishop stated carefully. "There was a palpable sense of the divine presence that day. Whether this constitutes an apparition in the canonical sense is for the Church to determine through proper investigation. What I can say is that the fruits have been abundant: conversion, healing, and a renewed hunger for God." But while Church officials proceeded with appropriate caution, the faithful needed no institutional confirmation of what they had experienced. The transformation in their lives provided all the validation they required. Maria Gonzalez, the Oakland grandmother who had felt called to attend the procession, found her entire approach to faith revolutionized. "I've been going to Mass my whole life, but it had become routine, almost automatic. After the bridge, everything changed. Prayer became real conversation with God. The Eucharist became alive for me. That lady in the fog, she made God real in a way I'd never experienced." The ripple effects extended far beyond the Catholic community. Interfaith dialogue groups reported increased attendance as people of various faiths sought to understand the spiritual hunger that the apparition had awakened. Rabbi Jonathan Goldstein of Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco found himself fielding unusual questions from his own congregation. People were asking about the nature of divine manifestations, about whether God still communicates directly with humanity today. The bridge event had opened conversations about faith and the sacred that I hadn't heard in decades of rabbinical work. Even secular therapists and counselors reported an increase in clients discussing spiritual experiences and seeking to understand the role of faith in their lives. Dr. Michael Thompson, a psychologist in San Francisco, observed, "In the weeks following the reported apparition, I saw a significant increase in clients wanting to explore questions of meaning, purpose, and transcendence. Many specifically mentioned the Golden Gate event as a catalyst for deeper self-examination." Within 48 hours of the Golden Gate Bridge apparition, the ripple effects were being felt across California and beyond. Social media exploded with first-hand accounts, cell phone videos, and profound testimonies of spiritual renewal that defied typical viral content patterns. The hashtag Golden Gate apparition began trending nationally, but unlike typical viral content, these posts carried a weight of sincerity and transformation that social media experts found unprecedented and impossible to dismiss as manufactured enthusiasm. Dr. Sarah Kim, a digital media researcher at Stanford University, analyzed the phenomenon for her research on religious content in social media. Viral religious content usually follows predictable patterns: sensationalism, exploitation, rapid decline in engagement. This was completely different. The posts were deeply personal, consistently authentic, and sustained over months rather than days. Churches throughout California reported what could only be described as a spiritual revival reminiscent of the Great Awakenings of American history. St. Francis Parish in Sacramento saw its weekly adoration attendance increase from 30 people to over 300. Holy Spirit Parish in Fresno began offering Mass 3 times on Sunday to accommodate the crowds. Father Miguel Torres, pastor of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Los Angeles, witnessed the transformation in his own parish. Young people started coming back, not just showing up, but engaging deeply. Families that had drifted away from the faith were suddenly at every Massachusetts. They all mentioned the same thing: something had awakened in them after hearing about the Golden Gate. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the phenomenon was its effect on non-Catholics and even non-believers. Houses of worship across different denominations reported increased attendance and deeper spiritual conversations among their congregations. Pastor Mark Williams of Grace Community Church, a prominent evangelical congregation in the Bay Area, initially approached the reports with theological skepticism but found himself reconsidering as he witnessed the spiritual hunger it awakened. "I'll be honest, I was prepared to dismiss this as Catholic mysticism that had little relevance for Protestant Christians," Pastor Williams admitted. "But when members of my own congregation started talking about feeling called to deeper prayer, about experiencing God's presence in new ways, I had to acknowledge that God was working through this event in ways that transcended denominational boundaries." The secular media struggled with how to cover the story objectively. Major newspapers sent investigative reporters expecting to debunk what they assumed would be easily explained mass hysteria, but found themselves confronting credible witnesses and inexplicable phenomena. Jennifer Walsh, the psychiatrist from San Francisco General, found herself defending the validity of the witnesses' experiences in both professional and media settings. "I went into this expecting to document a psychological phenomenon that could be explained through crowd dynamics or suggestibility. What I found were hundreds of coherent, credible people describing consistent experiences that don't fit standard psychological models." The economic impact was also significant and measurable. San Francisco tourism officials reported a 40% increase in visitors specifically requesting tours that included the Golden Gate Bridge. Hotels near Catholic churches experienced unprecedented booking requests from pilgrims traveling from across the country. But commerce wasn't the driving force behind this movement. The transformation was spiritual, not material. Susan Taylor, a real estate agent from Palo Alto who had been struggling with a crisis of faith, organized a prayer group that grew from 5 women to over 200 in just 3 weeks. People were hungry for something real, something that connected them to God in a tangible way, Susan explained. The bridge experience had shown them it was possible. They wanted to cultivate that connection in their daily lives. Requests for baptisms increased dramatically across the state. Adult education classes in Catholic parishes filled to capacity as people sought to understand the faith tradition that had produced such an experience. Father Joseph Chen at St. Mary's Cathedral reported, "Our RCIA program, the classes for adults wanting to become Catholic, went from 15 people to 150 people in 2 months." Most cited the Golden Gate apparition as their first step toward seriously considering the Catholic faith. Universities began offering courses examining the sociological and psychological implications of the event. Documentary filmmakers traveled to San Francisco to capture the ongoing impact on the community. Dr. Robert Hayes, a sociology professor at San Francisco State University, found himself studying a contemporary religious phenomenon unlike anything in his academic experience. Regardless of the metaphysical questions involved, the documented improvements in mental health, family relationships, and community involvement among participants are statistically significant and sustained over time. The phenomenon attracted international attention as well. Delegations from established Marian pilgrimage sites like Lourdes, Fatima, and Medjugorje visited San Francisco to study the events and interview witnesses, seeking to understand the spiritual dynamics at work. Father Pierre Dubois from Lourdes Sanctuary spent a week interviewing participants. The consistency of testimonies, the lasting conversions, and the fruits of peace and healing all bear the hallmarks of authentic apparitions recognized by the Church. Time will tell if this receives official approval, but the spiritual fruits are undeniable. Medical professionals documented unexplained healings beyond Carmen Santos' arthritis relief. Dr. Patricia Hernandez collected testimonies of improvements in depression, anxiety, addiction, and chronic pain that occurred during or immediately after the procession. While we must always be cautious about attributing medical improvements to supernatural causes, Dr. Hernandez noted, the documented cases of healing associated with this event follow patterns consistent with Lourdes and other recognized miraculous healings. The impact on families was particularly profound. Marriage counselors throughout California reported couples scheduling appointments specifically to discuss how the spiritual renewal following the apparition was affecting their relationships. 6 months after the Golden Gate Bridge apparition, the most compelling evidence of its authenticity lay not in photographs or videos, but in the completely transformed lives of those who were present that day. The changes were so profound and sustained that skeptics found themselves unable to dismiss the testimonies as temporary religious enthusiasm. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the oncologist who had reluctantly joined the procession, found her approach to medicine forever changed in ways that surprised her colleagues and enhanced her effectiveness as a physician. "I still practice rigorous, evidence-based medicine," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "But now I also pray with my patients when they're open to it. I've learned that healing involves more than just treating disease, it requires touching the soul. My success rates have actually improved because patients feel more supported and hopeful." Her colleagues at UCSF Medical Center noticed the change immediately. Dr. Rodriguez began volunteering at a free clinic in the Mission District, started each day with quiet meditation, and approached difficult cases with a serenity that seemed to comfort both patients and staff. Michael Stevens, the former Marine who had provided security for the event, experienced perhaps the most dramatic transformation of any witness. His journey from combat veteran struggling with PTSD to healed advocate for other veterans became a beacon of hope for many. "I'd been carrying rage and trauma from my deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan for years," Michael explained, his voice steady and peaceful. "PTSD, survivor's guilt, anger that consumed me. I'd tried therapy, medication, everything the VA offered. But that day on the bridge, when I felt that overwhelming love and peace, 20 years of carried trauma just lifted away like fog clearing from a mountain." Michael began working with other veterans struggling with combat trauma, sharing his experience and helping them find their own path to healing. He started a non-profit organization called Bridge to Hope that has helped over 200 veterans process their experiences. Lisa Park, the Korean-American nurse whose 6-year-old son had pointed to the pretty lady in the fog, discovered that her children's simple faith had ignited a family spiritual renewal that strengthened every aspect of their lives. "My children started asking deep questions about God, about prayer, about how we can help others," Lisa explained. "We began volunteering at a homeless shelter as a family every weekend. The Bridge experience taught them that faith is real and active, not just something you talk about on Sundays." Her marriage also deepened as she and her husband began praying together daily for the first time in their relationship. "We'd been going through the motions of family life," Lisa admitted. "After the apparition, we remembered what really matters." But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Tony Ricci, the tech executive who had attended as a skeptic, filming the event to debunk what he expected to be religious fanaticism. "I've spent my career solving problems through logic, data, and rational analysis," Tony reflected. "I'm the guy who demands evidence for everything. But that day forced me to acknowledge that reality includes dimensions beyond what we can measure or quantify. I couldn't ignore what I experienced, what I filmed, what I felt." Tony began exploring Catholic teaching seriously for the first time in his adult life and entered RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, 6 months later. His conversion shocked his Silicon Valley colleagues but inspired several to begin their own spiritual journeys. "I'm still an engineer, still believe in logic and evidence," Tony clarified. "But now I understand that truth is bigger than what fits in a spreadsheet. Faith and reason aren't enemies, they're partners in understanding reality." Carmen Santos, the grandmother from East San Jose whose arthritis had been healed during the blessing, found that her physical healing had been accompanied by something even more significant, a transformation of her entire approach to suffering and joy. "The arthritis pain came back gradually over the months," Carmen admitted honestly. "But something else stayed permanently. A joy, a peace that I carry with me every day. I wake up grateful now, even when my body hurts. I understand that healing isn't always about removing pain. Sometimes it's about finding meaning in it." Carmen organized a weekly prayer group for Spanish-speaking women in her community, which grew to include over 150 participants and spawned social service initiatives that helped dozens of families in need. David Park, the recovering alcoholic whose craving for alcohol disappeared during the apparition, celebrated his second year of sobriety by returning to the Golden Gate Bridge with his family. "I stood at the same spot where I saw her in the fog," David remembered. I thanked God for giving me my life back. 2 years without a drink, 2 years of real peace with my family. My wife says I'm like a different person, the man she married before addiction took over. That's a miracle that continues every day. David became a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous and credits his experience on the bridge with giving him the spiritual foundation necessary for sustained recovery. The ripple effects continued to spread in unexpected ways. Sarah Chen, the UC Berkeley photography student who had documented the event for a journalism assignment, changed her major from journalism to theology after the experience completely reoriented her understanding of reality and purpose. I went there to document what I thought would be religious fanaticism, Sarah reflected. Instead, I encountered something that showed me there are dimensions of existence I'd never considered. I couldn't go back to studying the world as if it were only material. Even critics of the apparition acknowledged the positive changes they observed in participants. Dr. Robert Hayes, the sociology professor who had initially dismissed the event, found himself documenting outcomes that challenged his academic assumptions. Regardless of the metaphysical questions involved, Dr. Hayes concluded, the documented improvements in mental health, family relationships, community involvement, and overall well-being among participants are statistically significant and sustained over 2 years of follow-up. From a purely social science perspective, whatever happened on that bridge produced measurably positive effects on human flourishing. Churches throughout California reported not just increased attendance, but deeper engagement from parishioners. Volunteer rates for social services skyrocketed. Donations to charities increased dramatically. Most significantly, reports of family reconciliation, addiction recovery, and mental health improvement continued to pour in. Father Antonio Reyes, who had heard the mysterious singing during the procession, watched his parish in San Francisco's Mission District transform into a vibrant center of faith and community service. It wasn't just that more people came to Mass, Father Reyes observed. They came with different hearts. Prayer became more fervent, service became more generous, love became more real. The apparition had awakened something in people that changed how they lived every day. The healing testimonies continued to accumulate. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the Marian scholar, had documented over 50 cases of significant physical, emotional, or spiritual healing associated with the event, a rate unprecedented in her decades of studying religious phenomena. On May 19, 2025, exactly 1 year after the Golden Gate Bridge apparition, over 15,000 people gathered for a commemorative procession. The crowd was nearly 4 times larger than the original, including pilgrims from across the United States and around the world who had traveled to San Francisco to experience the place where heaven had touched earth. The investigation by the Archdiocese of San Francisco continued, following the careful protocols established by the Vatican for examining claimed apparitions. Medical experts, meteorologists, psychologists, and theologians had all contributed to the ongoing study, which had attracted attention from the Vatican's dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. But for the thousands whose lives had been transformed, the investigation was secondary to the lived reality of their ongoing conversion and growth in faith. The fruits of the experience continued to multiply and deepen with time. Archbishop Cordileone addressed the anniversary gathering with words that would be quoted in churches worldwide and studied by theologians examining contemporary religious phenomena. Whether this event receives official recognition as an apparition is less important than the fruits it has produced, the Archbishop declared to the massive crowd. By their fruits you shall know them, and the fruits of this experience have been abundant: conversion, healing, hope, and love. God has clearly worked through these events to draw people closer to Himself. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the Marian scholar who had been present for the original apparition, published her preliminary findings after a year of intensive research. Her 300-page report would become a landmark study in contemporary religious phenomena. The consistency of witness testimonies, the sustained spiritual fruits, and the profound personal transformations all align with characteristics found in church-approved apparitions throughout history, Dr. Hernandez concluded. While final determination rests with church authority, the evidence suggests we may be witnessing a significant intervention of divine grace in our time. The phenomenon had attracted unprecedented international attention. Delegations from Lourdes, Fatima, Medjugorje, and other major pilgrimage sites visited San Francisco to study the events and interview witnesses. The parallels to historically recognized apparitions were striking. But perhaps the most significant validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Morrison, the weather forecaster who had observed the unusual fog patterns from his helicopter, presented his findings to both the American Meteorological Society and a Vatican commission investigating the claims. After analyzing satellite data, wind patterns, temperature gradients, and atmospheric conditions for the entire week surrounding the event, Dr. Morrison testified, "I can find no natural explanation for the fog formations observed that day. The patterns defied every known meteorological principle and occurred under atmospheric conditions that should have made such formations impossible." His testimony carried particular weight because of his initial skepticism and his purely scientific approach to analyzing the data. The meteorological anomalies provided objective, measurable evidence that something extraordinary had occurred. The story of the Golden Gate Bridge apparition had become more than a local religious event. It had sparked conversations about faith, doubt, and the possibility of divine intervention in modern times across secular society. Universities offered courses examining the sociological, psychological, and theological implications. Documentary filmmakers from around the world traveled to San Francisco to capture the ongoing impact on individuals and communities. Major news networks produced special reports exploring the intersection of faith and reason in contemporary culture. But for those who were there that day, no amount of analysis could diminish the power of what they experienced. The testimonies remained consistent, the transformations continued to deepen, and the sense of having encountered something divine remained as vivid as the day it occurred. Maria Gonzalez, now 68, had become an unofficial spokesperson for the witnesses. Her simple, authentic testimony had been featured in documentaries and news reports around the world. "They can study us, interview us, investigate us all they want," Maria said with gentle conviction. "But they can't take away what we felt, what we saw, what we know in our hearts. That beautiful lady in the fog changed everything for so many of us. She reminded us that God is real, that He loves us, and that He still works miracles in our world today." As our story comes to an end, the question remains: did the Virgin Mary truly appear above the Golden Gate Bridge on that Pentecost Sunday in 2024? The answer may depend less on official church pronouncements and more on the evidence written in the transformed lives of thousands of ordinary people who experienced something extraordinary. What cannot be disputed is that on May 19, 2024, something happened on the Golden Gate Bridge that challenged assumptions, deepened faith, and reminded a skeptical world that mystery and wonder still have a place in human experience. If this story has moved you, if it's challenged your own understanding of what's possible, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something that defied explanation? Has faith played a role in healing or transformation in your own life? Subscribe to join our community of seekers and believers, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation into the miraculous and mysterious. Share this video with someone who needs hope in their life. You never know how God might use these stories to touch hearts and change lives. And remember, faith isn't about having all the answers. Sometimes it's about being open to questions we never thought to ask. Keep seeking, keep believing, and keep your eyes open for the extraordinary in the ordinary. You never know when heaven might touch earth in your own life. Until next time, may you walk in faith, hope, and love. And may you always remember that miracles are not relics of the past. They are invitations to believe that God is still writing beautiful stories in our world today.